I'm going to tell you a story. Well, you could call it a myth or a legend or whatever, but one thing I will ask of you. Don't ask me to say whether it's 100% absolutely the truth. Of course, it happened some time ago, and well, you know how stories go. Well, sir, his name was Slumach. Just Slumach. Nobody ever got friendly enough with him to know his first name or how old he was. But then that's just two of the things that old Katzie Indian kept to herself. Slumach! The most important, of course, being the whereabouts of his gold mine. Yes, sir. Old Slumach kept his secrets, even as the hangman was slipping the noose around his neck and pulling the lever that opened that trapdoor and sent him plunging through into the vault of eternal silence. Of course, nowadays, folks don't care much about old Slumach. I mean, whether he was guilty or not, or where he came from or how old he was. No, sir. They straight away want to know about his gold mine, and if anybody found it. And I tell them they best find out how many people have died trying to find it first. That's right. You heard me. So if you're thinking of trekking off half-cocked into Slumach country, there's some things you should know about first, especially about old Slumach himself. How he could talk to the animals, for instance. Swim with the otter, and he knew how to commune with the spirits. And his Indian name meant rain. Of course, folks knew what they heard, that he was pretty much of a loner. But he would surprise them by showing up in those saloons in New Westminster, wild and crazy, just like those animals he'd been living with. And he'd order up an orgy of women and drink and all kinds of extravagancies. And he'd pay for them with gold nuggets the size of walnuts. And they heard tell of how he'd throw a handful of nuggets on the barroom floor just for the pleasure of watching the white men grovel around on their hands and knees. Well, of course, that kind of carrying on soon depletes the coppers. So off he'd go to his secret mine, vanishing into that deadly landscape as if he'd dropped through a tear in the fabric of the universe. Now, I know what you're thinking. 'Cause all folks generally think pretty much alike. You're thinking, why didn't anybody follow him? Well, don't think they haven't tried. For 100 years. Expedition after expedition. Men and women and children and dogs and probably even parrots. Maps they had, every one upon which X marked the spot, and letters in hand from dying men, vowing they were only one expedition away from riches beyond your wildest. Well, now, I'm just getting a wee mite ahead of myself. Suffice it to say, that those who first tried to follow Slumach always failed, confounded by his bush sense and his knowledge of secret Indian trails. And those who are still trying, yes, sir, they should know there's still danger in Slumach country, against which you can throw all manner of gear and helicopters, all to absolutely no avail.
Volcanic Brown's search party would be right along this area here, above Corbold Creek.
Yeah, I expect so.
Now, for a place to land, do you have a suggestion there for the helicopter?
Well, we want to work in this area here, and I see a fine ridge here, which would give us good access to the country around.
So we should set up our base camp about here, just above the timberline.
And there's a small lake for water right here.
We've been researching the legend of Slumach's gold now for about 15 years, and mounted several expeditions. And on this current one, we've pieced together a map and a route to follow the trail of Volcanic Brown, who was a prospector in the 20s, who went missing in the area. Search party found his camp, and in his camp was a large quantity of gold. So if we can follow the trail and the route of the search party, then perhaps we'll find his last camp, and that'll put us in the area of where the gold is, if there is any gold.
Here's a quote from another article. Here it says he murdered those who followed him to his secret mine. He sent 12 to a horrible death, somewhere in the mountains of Pitt Lake. Here's another example. Indian killer, once terror of Pitt Lake. Slumach murdered trespassers for no apparent reason beyond the fact that he liked to be monarch of all he surveyed. It says here, it was noticed by police that every time Slumach left town, a very attractive girl went missing. To date, they noticed that 3 white girls and 5 lovely Indian maidens had very mysteriously gone missing.
And then there was Molly Tynan, half Irish and half Chinese. Can you imagine that? An exotic beauty, if ever there was one. Well, she was just about as much of an enigma as old Slumach. But she'd heard stories of this Indian's wild spending sprees, and she fixated on the idea of ingratiating herself into his confidence the next time he showed up. So she took herself a job waitressing at the old Sasquatch Cafe. I can smell her perfume just thinking about her. And the way that she walked, well, you know what I mean. So our Molly was confident that she could handle this Bluebeard. And sure enough, when next he showed up with his pack of gold, she won his favor, and a place as his cook and hot water bottle on his return to the mountains. But old Molly fared no better than the rest of them. They dragged her body from the Fraser River with a knife buried deep into her heart, a knife identified as Slumach's. So old Slumach was arrested, tried, and sentenced to hang.
So Slumach was supposed to have murdered all these women to protect his gold. Yet the facts are here for everyone to see, under this headline. Shot dead, September 9th, 1890. It says he was arrested for shooting Louis B. A terrible, unpremeditated murder was committed yesterday afternoon at a point on Lillooet Slough not far from the Pitt River Bridge. An Indian named Slumach, aged about 60 years, was hunting in this neighborhood and came out of the bush with his gun in his hand. A half-breed named Louis B. sauntered up to Slumach and asked him in a casual way what he was shooting around here. Without a moment's warning or any preliminary sign of anger, Slumach instantly leveled his gun at B and fired. October 25th, 1890. Headline, Starved Out. The Indian Slumach was forced to give himself up yesterday to the police. He had eaten nothing for several days and was in a terrible state of emaciation and thoroughly exhausted. The jury retired at 3:45 and after being out 15 minutes, returned with the verdict of guilty. His lordship sentenced Slumach to be hanged on January 16th next. Imagine just 15 minutes for the jury to make a decision to send a man to the gallows.
I've heard it said that our primal urges can move mountains, that life possesses an innocent voraciousness that feeds on lives. Well, I suppose old Slumach's story would prove that theory all right. But I wonder, is it really true? Or is Slumach just the product of human imagination that stretches backwards beyond memory? Now, we're a restless lot, you and me, always searching for causes. Why, when we hear thunder, we think, oh, must be the voice of God. Old Slumach awaited his judgment day like a saint. And on the morning of his execution, January the 16th, 1891, he arose from a sound sleep. He ate a hearty English breakfast, and he mounted the gallows steps with nary a tremor. Or in the words of the reporters of the day, he expiated his bloody crime upon the scaffold. Now, it is rumored that two strange things happened that day. A woman appeared with a canoe full of gold to pay for Slumach's release. And Justice Montague Drake, the judge who'd sentenced old Slumach to hang, offered to commute his sentence to life imprisonment if he divulged the source of his gold. But old Slumach held fast to his secret. He told the attending priest, Mika Melmus, mine Melmus. That's Indian. It means the mine dies with me.
Mika Melmus, mine Melmus.
Here we are, left alone in the mountains for the next 10 days, until our helicopter returns. A lot can happen in that time. The lift in took 45 minutes. If we had to hike out, it would take at least a week. We're all a bit apprehensive, but we hope the weather and our luck holds.
Some folks say that everything we do is recorded in the annals of time. Everything is written down, nothing is left out. All injustices are avenged. Some say just such an injustice was done to old Slumach on that cold January 16th, 1891. They say that he was just an old man who didn't know anything of the white man's ways. He didn't speak the language of the court, and the record shows that 2 witnesses for the defense were never called. And indeed, old Slumach himself was never asked to tell his side of the story. Mika Melmus, mine Melmus.
These 2 men were in a canoe in the river shouting, "What did you kill? What did you kill?" you know? And the old man answered he shot a deer and he couldn't find it. He had a very weak voice, I believe, and the Louis B, I guess, you know, didn't hear him well enough. He got in a huff and, "What's the matter with you?" Or so-and-so, you know, called him names. And he jumped out of the canoe with what he called one bit axe, swinging it around. He said, don't answer me, I'm coming up there and chop your head off. And when he pulled the trigger and shot, and Louis B. jumped backwards, oh, so much stood there wondering what he was going to do. He sat down and wept a bit,
He was judged unfairly. Very, terrible picture painted of him. He was, laid to rest in a place that wasn't his own.
Well, I heard lots of stories about him. Somebody said that he was more or less a Robin Hood, helping the poor and stealing from the rich.
Been looking a long time, you haven't found anything yet, eh? I don't think they will either.
This is the best quartz vein we've seen, isn't it?
Is quartz where you really find gold?
Actually, it is.
Here's a bit. Now this rock here, it shows potential for gold.
You're right, really. Here, Kathy.
Old Slumach had, however, passed on the secret to his mine, to his son, on the condition that he never go there unless times were really bad. Slumach the younger, known less for his kinship with the band than with the whiskey bottle, headed for the hills before his father's corpse was even cool. And when he returned with the gold, he found it would buy everything except what he wanted the most. Firewater. So, he had to take on a partner. A half-breed who was only too happy to wield a pick and offer his services as a bootlegger in return for a share of this El Dorado. The problem was that he wanted more than his share. So when next they went after the gold, only the half-breed returned. Some people say that old Slumach never did place a curse on his mine. It was only the violation by his son of their sacred trust that roused the old man's spirit to punish all those who would violate his sacred testament. And so doing, he rendered his own son as his first victim.
We've dropped several thousand feet into the valley of the Pitt River and are following the route taken by early prospectors who've scoured this area for over 100 years. For some of them, this was a one-way road. Much of the area we travel in remains untouched by man. We begin to feel our venture is a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. Are we tracking a phantom? A miner's cabin. We're tempted to jump to conclusions. We're thinking of Slumach's most determined believer, the old prospector Volcanic Brown. He had a cabin somewhere below the tree line.
I don't like hanging on to this. Fall right over.
Nobody home.
Look at this frying pan. It's got holes in it. I have one like this at home.
What a piece of machinery.
Why do you think mining?
Old shovel. Well, there was a gold pan there, shovels. What else would he be doing out here?
Well, let's see if we can find out where this fellow is working.
Thank you. Let's have a look in here.
I wonder how long this has been here.
Well, I'd say it's could be half a century easily. there's a vein, a quartz vein that goes right along the wall.
Ah,
Now back to the rock.
let's see what's in this rubble here.
How would they have dug this cave anyway?
Now there's a nice rock with a bit of quartz running right through there. And it's got a bit of a sparkle to it too.
So there could be some gold in there.
Yeah.
Look at that.
I mean, a guy would have to use diamonds.
There's little flecks of gold in that, eh?
I'd say so. You see a little bit of quartz running through there.
Just tiny, tiny flecks, trace gold.
Very nice.
One guy that we knew that went up there, he never returned. He was lost up there. So he said that in itself tells you that it should be left alone. If it was there, then by all means leave it alone.
Tommy Williams and Peter Pierre decided they'd go up doing some looking up in the Pitt country, and Peter Pierre fell and he broke his hip and they had to carry him out, so that was perhaps the beginning of this curse of the lost mine at Pitt Lake. He vowed he'd never go back up into the country again, and he never did. So. He who looks for the lost mine dies. That was headlines.
So 3 people that were quite confident in what they did for a living, quite confident in their abilities, have died that were associated to this directly with me, directly associated to the valley, had been in the valley or flown over the valley with me, are no longer alive. So it's interesting. A number of things that have happened surrounding myself going in would give rise to the suggestion there may be a curse. However, I don't believe in curses.
Yes, it's greed that writes the never-ending tale of human tragedy. Natural-born greed. Well, that's as good as a curse any old day of the week. You see, you have to understand that gold fever was an epidemic at the turn of the century. Life was a hit-and-miss thing. It was a gamble, a game that was won by those who could brag of riches enough to take a bath in champagne or send their laundry to Paris to have it perfumed. So it's not surprising then, is it, that our half-breed heading up country to increase the size of his fortune found himself with a second shadow. A shadow in the form of a somewhat more than curious prospector, a Californian, a seasoned miner from the Alaskan gold fields, somebody who would give old Slumach a run for his money, and somebody who would start a stampede of folks from all tarnation, all coming to gamble their all. Jackson. That was his name. John Jackson. Some people even stopped pointing the finger at old Slumach and started blaming Jackson for the 100 years of greed and misery that was to follow. Now, Jackson had heard about the lost mine, and he went public with the fact that he intended to find it. So he tracked that half-breed, and eventually he came to the end of that proverbial rainbow, whereupon that poor half-breed was forthwith dispatched into the land of the hereafter, and he became what your statisticians might call victim number 2. But white men were easily lost in that treacherous topography, and if not lost, then at least frozen, in a country where the weather regularly blew the idea of orderly seasons all to hell and gone. When Jackson was next accounted for, he was alone. His hands shook, his clothes were in shreds, and he spoke deliriously of a country that might well have been hell on earth. A nightmarish landscape of dense mists and cliffs and crevasses and famine and flood and a cold, cold wind that spoke to him in tongues. In his gnarled hands, he held a heavy satchel that he guarded night and day. Yes, greed was indeed riding shotgun on old Slumach's curse. Not long after Jackson returned home, word filtered back that he had deposited over $10,000 in raw gold in the British North American Bank in San Francisco. But Jackson, too, had fallen under the spell of old Slumach's curse, for he never regained the energy to return. And within 3 years, he found himself rather like the old Indian on death row, infected with a secret that would not die with him. It was a friend in Seattle to whom he passed on the dreaded Slumach disease, a fellow called Shotwell. But unlike Slumach, Jackson made no dire warnings, only wished his friend the best of luck in finding riches beyond his wildest dreams.
I had been out over 2 months and found myself running short of grub. I had almost made up my mind to light out the next day. I climbed to the top of a sharp ridge and looked down into the canyon or valley about 1.5 miles long. And what struck me as singular, it appeared to have no outlet. The creek entered a crack and was lost. Going upstream, I came to a place where the bedrock was bare. And here, you could hardly believe me, the bedrock was yellow with gold. Some of the nuggets were as big as walnuts, and there were many chunks carrying quartz. I saw there was millions stowed around in the little cracks. I buried part of the gold at the foot of a large tent-shaped rock facing the creek. You can't miss it.
We're not going to make it to the top of that ridge, Dick.
No, I think we can camp up ahead here. It'll be good for tonight.
We got to find some water.
As long as it's cool. I'm gonna rest.
Yeah.
It's got a tent shape to it, eh?
Well, there's a nice big shelter in here.
Caches of gold, tent-shaped rocks, treasure maps. They sprang up like daffodils. One enterprising young American printed up thousands of them and sold them all for $12.50 apiece. Jackson's letter turned up in various hands, leading some men to riches, some to their death, often to both, which leads me to the most famous of all the seekers after Slumach's gold, Volcanic Brown. Now, Brown was a legend in his own right, a respected prospector from the interior, a man who'd staked several rich claims. And also he was supposed to be some sort of a self-taught doctor, a herbalist, who once, under the influence of liquid hospitality, bragged about how that he had cured old Slumach's granddaughter from a chronic ailment and was rewarded with details of the location of the lost mine. Well, Brown eventually acted on that information, and in the year of 1925 he showed up in the Pitt Lake area. And folks say that, old as he was, he came out of that dreadful landscape every fall for a few years with a decent poke of gold.
Robert A. Brown, He had quite a few names. He was known as Doc Brown, Volcanic Brown, Sunset Brown. He became quite famous in the Princeton area. He discovered the copper mines up around Princeton. And in about 1925, he came down to the coast here thinking, I guess he'd gotten a copy of the so-called Jackson letter and he'd studied it and figured that he could go up there and maybe pinpoint the location of this glory hole that was mentioned in the letter.
Well, one year an early cold snap caught Brown high up in the hills, and he could tell by the tingle that his pinkies were less than flush. But by the time he took a look, it was too late to do anything more than any man of action would do. Take out your pocket knife, burn the crust off the blade, and sit down and... Well, you have to understand that Brown was a highly respected man at a time when honor took a back seat to ambition. One time, Brown felt damn sure he was being followed to his mine, so he backtracked and discovered his hunch was right. He didn't have to turn on his powers of persuasion, however, for he found the interloper at the bottom of a cliff, with one leg that was already turned around and going home. Now, Volcanic could have left him there with little to bother his conscience, but instead he did the moral thing and risked his short enough already mining season to help that hapless victim back to civilization.
We haven't seen another soul for over a week, and we realize how easily one could go missing without a trace in this country. Then we make our most significant find.
Look at this. That's interesting.
That'd be a sleeping bag?
The canvas, this is what are we, about 6,000 feet?
I'm sure.
Could be Mr. Brown's last camp. There's a shovel. Look at an old shovel.
Yeah, I wonder where the end of it is. Look at this. What is it?
Oh my.
Oh, neat.
I know what that is. I think.
What is it?
It's a mortar and pestle for grinding rock samples.
It's a miner's, prospector's tool. Well, that's a pretty valuable thing to leave here, eh?
Oh, neat.
Wow, is that everything?
And there's all your gold in the bottom.
Huh.
But in the fall of 1931, it was old Doc Brown who failed to show up. Oh, they launched an all-out search party, and it took weeks to find his camp, buried high in a pass between two glaciers.
Search unsuccessful, but it was a glorious new trail these mushers blazed in the teeth of a November blizzard. It has snowed for 16 consecutive days. An icy wind still whips down from the north. The trail is buried 10 feet deep. Food has run out. Civilization is 5 days' march away. Two men ply a pale fire with frozen wood. In front of them frowns the 60-foot lip of Stave Glacier. About them stretch miles and miles of steep valleys, ridges, gullies, and mountaintops. The date is November 20th, 1931. The climax of an unsuccessful 3-week search in winter's worst weather. Over a 100-mile section of BC's roughest country for the missing prospector, Volcanic Brown.
Yes, old Doc Brown was gone for good. Another victim in this deadly saga. For in his tent, which they eventually found, was a jar. A very large jar of pure gold. I like to think that old Doc Brown is still out there somewhere in those mountains, guarding the gold with Slumach and counting the modern-day victims of that treacherous curse.
And he actually had to amputate his own toes. And he walked out with a tin can placed over the end of his boot in order to protect his toes from the rigors of walking.
That gives me the creeps. In fact, I'm beginning to wonder if we should even be here. Do you really think that this is Volcanic Brown's last camp? Seriously?
Well, we're about 6,000 feet in elevation. We're right on the Stave Divide above the Homestead Glacier. It's exactly where the search party in 1931 was looking for Brown.
And this mortar and pestle we found, it has to be volcanic Brown.
Do you think that's enough?
Well, it's more than most people have ever found.
Yeah, if they returned.
Some of those who died next were people that I knew. Alfred Gaspard, an experienced prospector, radioed out that he was close to his El Dorado. Then he failed to show for a scheduled rendezvous with his helicopter. He was never heard of again. That was in 1950. Louis Hagbo, a naval draftsman, set out after Slumach's gold in 1960, found at the bottom of a cliff, dead of a heart attack. Tiny Allen, a handyman at the Port Arms Hotel, just up the way, came out of those deadly hills all excited with the intention of staking a claim the following spring. He died that winter of a heart attack. They say that old Slumach guards the entrance to his mine to this very day.
As I started in the last 5 years looking for this, to me a curse was nothing. I didn't believe in them. But as time went on, yes, definitely, I stronger and stronger believed that there had to be a curse. But we know that Jackson was in there. We've never found any clues that Slumach was in there except for the pelvis off a 14-year-old Indian girl way up in the mountains. The tent-shaped rock is right behind me here now. We brought it out, and we set it up here. We figured once we do the mine here, that's going to be worth a lot of money. It'll probably go in the office or into a museum or somewhere like that as time goes on.
That area has been relatively close to population for a long time, and a lot of people have been up there looking for gold and so on, but it's very rugged, it's very tough country, and a lot of it is covered by glaciers and snow and ice and so on. It's a difficult place to work in, and a lot of it is covered by vegetation, so it's a difficult place to work. And most recently, of course, it's now a park. A large part of it is a park or will become a park in the future. So it'll be an impossible place to work in now from a prospecting or exploration point of view.
What's our elevation there, Dick?
We are at 5,400 right now.
5,400, so we're right here. We're
Yep.
going to have to come from the right there onto that glacier, which means we're going to have to come right along that ridge there to the glacier, across the glacier.
We go up through the low point, across, and that'll put us up on top there.
Right up on the Stave Glacier.
Yeah, and according to our map, that'll be right on the route, approximately as best we can, of the search party that went in after Brown.
Yep. Well, we're doing good.
So when we get up there, we'll have a look at it, and we should be right on our target.
Curse or no curse, this is a lonely and dangerous country. We rope up for a scary glacier crossing. We're a day's hard climb away from our final camp.
It was with mingled feelings that at least some of us assembled in the Westminster jail yard this morning regarded the blessings of civilization. It has been said that the very worst use we can put a man to is to hang him. And those of us familiar with the story of Slumach must not merely have doubted the utility of the old Cowichan's execution, but perhaps even its justice. True it is that he was the murderer of certainly one, and perhaps several other fellow creatures, but he was an old man, and until a generation ago, blissfully ignorant of the existence of the white man. His untutored and simple nature saw in the paleface an enemy trying to drive him and his people off the land which had been their hunting ground since time began. Can a leopard change his spots? Can a middle-aged savage be expected to change his ways at the word of the white man, who benefits the more as the Indians become fewer? Such were the thoughts which forced themselves upon your correspondent as he stood in the jail yard this morning, awaiting the arrival of the condemned man on his short last journey to the scaffold.
They say that Slumach guards the entrance to his mind to this very day. Old Chief August Jack Catzalano went looking for the mine many times. Came close once, he told me, but he had what you might call a close encounter with a large black cloud that spirited him farther away the closer he got to the gold. Chief Catzalano never fought back. I'll never go back, he said. Of course, Catzalano was ready to believe anything after hearing of the time some other Indians led a prospector into the mountains. One night sitting around the campfire, old Slumach's ghost appeared. Take the white man no farther, it warned. Message received, all returned, all lived.
Nika Malmus, mine Malmus.
Today, we were supposed to be picked up by the helicopter, but we could be stranded here for weeks.
Lima Camp, this is Juliet Alpha Tango. We read you faintly. Over.
We've had heavy wind and snow now for 3 days. We're down to our last crumbs, but we're all okay. Can you try and get in tomorrow? Over.
There have been many, many men who caught the dreaded Slumach's gold disease and died. Somewhere between 24 and 36 by my count. Some of them were experienced prospectors with all manner of high-tech gear and radio links to the outside world. Some of them were rank amateurs, and then there's God knows how many others that we've never heard of.
A break in the clouds, and not a moment too soon. Up here, winter arrives in early September. The snow will cover the ground and all its secrets for at least the next 10 months. It's the end of our search for this year.
Were they all crazy, these rainbow chasers? Or were they just incurable romantics? Well, if they were like me, they loved a good story. And, like me, they probably added a bit here and there in the retelling, coached on by those inner demons who love to project their evil through the cracks in our subconscious onto the headlines of the day. Let me put that another way. When we don't have all the facts, we use fiction to explain the unexplainable. Well, that's all I know about old Slumach. Of course I know that in spite of what I've been telling you, you're sitting there thinking of lacing up your boots and picking up a shovel and a map and heading for those hills. Well, before you do, my friend, you best come and see me. I'll try and convince you otherwise. You'd best learn how to sweet-talk a grizzly, and after you've mastered that, you better practice communing with the spirits. Maybe by then you'll realize there are other things more conducive to health and longevity than mixing with Slumach and the curse of his lost mine.